Lloyd picked up his shovel and turned to Javier, telling him that if the Knight reformed, he would call Javier master for 1 whole year. He then told him that if it didn't, Javier would wear that dress when they returned to their estate. He asked Javier if it was a deal. Javier hurriedly agreed, telling Lloyd to just get rid of the Knight. Lloyd grinned and told him it was agreed. He raised his shovel and released a triple core mana blast, blasting it through the roof of the building. With his mana now drained, he held out his hand and activated Supercharge. As the Hell Knight tried to form, Lloyd started absorbing its energy. The Hell Knight called him a fool and told him that there was no way he could handle its mana. Lloyd began coughing up blood as the tainted mana took its toll on his body. It was too much, he couldn't purify it fast enough. But he couldn't stop now. This was the only way to win. He continued absorbing the energy as the Hell Knight laughed and told him that he had already lost. Lloyd coughed up more blood as the tainted mana continued to damage his body. A hand rested against his back, then another. Javier strengthened Lloyd's heart with his mana, while Siluria healed Lloyd's body with healing magic. Lloyd grinned and called the Knight a punk, telling him that he had already won. The Hell Knight screamed as its energy dissipated and then disappeared. Lloyd clenched his fist in quiet celebration, then collapsed and lost consciousness. Siluria rushed to him, worried, but Javier explained that Lloyd was fine. He had just done his victory dance before passing out. Siluria turned to Javier and asked how he could not be worried after what had just happened. Javier told her that he did worry, sometimes. Siluria told him to help her carry Lloyd to a bed. The system chimed. Lloyd had vanquished a commander of Hell. The King of Hell was astonished by Lloyd's achievement. He now wanted to meet him. After the event, Cannavaro was arrested, and the royal guard took him away. A few days later, Lloyd sat in his room, annoyed. Because of everything that had happened, his construction plans were delayed as all the workers needed rest after being drained by the ritual. He scratched his head, thinking about how he could make some money. After waking up from defeating the Hell Knight, he had learned another helpful skill. He had inadvertently absorbed some of the Hell Knight's power when he absorbed its tainted mana. His zombie domination skill had been upgraded, and the negative restriction had been removed. Lloyd grinned as he wondered if this meant he could have a zombie workforce now, one he would not lose control of the moment he stopped looking at them. He then wondered where he would even find zombies if that were the case, and just how useful this new skill really was. Maybe the only useful thing was that when he activated it, his eye glowed with an eerie light. A sudden knock came from his door. Lloyd turned and opened it, only to find a group of headless skeletons standing there. He peered out into the hallway and saw that the entire landing outside his room was filled with them. He asked who they were. The skeleton standing in front of him began to glow as a gelatinous head of ectoplasm slowly formed. It tried to speak, but the grotesque sight was too much for Lloyd, who covered his eyes and said it was too gross to look at. The skeleton asked for forgiveness, and the head dissolved back into the translucent jelly coating its bones. It lifted a sign, explaining that they were the bodies of the heads used in the incantation. They had felt the power of Hell earlier and had been drawn to it. Lloyd activated his new ability, his eye glowing, as he asked if that was what they had felt. They answered yes, explaining that now that they were close, they felt a familiar presence. It had been Lloyd who soothed their souls. Surprised, Lloyd thought back to the skulls he had laid to rest earlier. He had buried them properly and said a prayer for them. The skeletons explained that they had no memories of their past lives and now existed without purpose. They knelt before him and asked him to lead them. Lloyd told them he could give them work and asked if they required wages. They answered no. Ghosts did not need money. He then asked if they needed to be fed. They told him they did not, as they had no digestive systems. He asked if they needed a place to stay. They replied that they only required a 100-square-foot coffin to reside in. Lloyd's face lit up with a smile as he welcomed them, calling them the Skeleton Squad. He raised both hands into the air in celebration. He had finally done it. The free workforce he had always dreamed of. Javier stepped up behind him, wondering what all the commotion was. After seeing the skeletons celebrating with Lloyd, he sat back down, unbothered, and went back to sleep. Lloyd put the skeletons to use and set them to work on the Namaren project. Not long after, Count Namaren came to visit the construction site. The moment he laid eyes on the skeleton squad, he fainted on the spot. When he woke up, Lloyd explained that they were spirit workers. He told the Count that he had summoned them himself, claiming that he was a summoning genius, and he showed him his glowing eye. The Count slowly calmed down, and Lloyd's explanation appeared to convince him. Winter arrived, and not long after, the completed anchors were delivered from the Frontera estate, marking the final stage of the project. Nearby, Javier sat quietly, his thoughts returning to the moment they had defeated the Hell Knight. When he had stepped in to save Lloyd, Siluria's hand had rested over his as they pressed their hands together against Lloyd's back, channeling their magic at the same time. Thinking back to that moment, he had felt something he had not expected to feel. Footsteps approached from behind. Javier turned to see Siluria standing there. He bowed and informed her that Lloyd was currently at the wall, adding that he could call him over if she wanted an update. She cut him off, telling him that she was actually there to see him. Surprised, Javier asked what he could do for her. Siluria hesitated, then nervously spoke, explaining that she had noticed the unusual way he used mana, and that she wanted to learn how he was able to wield it so freely. Javier listened, then told her that he would happily teach her anything she wished to know. Watching from a distance, Lloyd saw Javier and Siluria talking together. His thoughts drifted back to the book, to the moment when Javier had lost her, the woman he loved. Javier had seemed destined to be alone, with everyone he cared for taken from him. Because of that, he had decided to never grow close to anyone again, believing that doing so would only put them in danger. But looking at Javier now, Lloyd could see it clearly. He seemed happy. Later, construction along the cliffs was completed. Lloyd packed his things, preparing to depart for his estate. Before leaving, he wished the Count well. The Count thanked him for everything he had done, and the people gathered to see him off, cheering Lloyd's name. Taking in the praise, Lloyd could not help but smile. He had earned a great deal of money from the project. Before he left, the Count made an offer. He asked Lloyd to marry his daughter, promising to name him the next Count of Namaren if he accepted. Lloyd bowed and apologised. He explained that Namaren already had a capable heir. Siluria was a fine leader, and one day she would become the greatest mage on the continent. Lloyd bowed once more and said that he would take his leave. As they departed, Javier cast one final glance back at Siluria as she waved to him. Lloyd noticed and told Javier that he should stay. The pay was better in Namaren, and he would rise quickly through the ranks and gain a high position. Confused, Javier asked what Lloyd was talking about. He stated that he was a knight of Frontera and would remain so until death. Lloyd asked what would happen if he ordered him to stay. Javier replied that Lloyd would have to execute him for disobeying orders. Lloyd sighed, realising that the man was far too stubborn. Then he smirked and told Javier that it was time to go home. Later, Lloyd arrived back at the Frontera estate. His mother and father rushed out to welcome him as Lloyd tried to explain the skeleton squad following behind him. They told him that at this point nothing he brought home surprised them anymore. Then Arcos's face dropped when he noticed Javier wearing a dress. Javier grimaced in embarrassment as Arcos asked why he was dressed that way. Javier thought back to the deal he had made with Lloyd. If Lloyd defeated the Hell Knight, he would wear the dress. Regret washed over him as he wished he had never agreed to such a bet. Arcos suddenly stepped forward and pulled Javier into a hug, telling him that it must have been hard to keep his secret hidden all these years. Javier tried to explain, but Arcos cut him off, saying that it was all right and that he accepted him for who he was. Javier attempted to say that it was not what Arcos thought, as Lloyd pointed and laughed. Lloyd was glad to be home. After making all that money, he could finally lounge around and live the sweet life he had always dreamed of. A voice suddenly called out, announcing that a command from the Queen was being delivered. A red carpet rolled out, and a messenger rolled down it theatrically. He stopped directly in front of Lloyd and unrolled a scroll, reading the order aloud. By royal decree, Her Majesty had selected Lloyd Frontera to join a special delegation that was to be sent to Isfahan. Lloyd recoiled in shock at the words. The messenger then informed him that he was to depart at once. Guards seized Lloyd and dragged him toward their carriage as he protested, thinking the cushy life was so close. Lloyd sat in the carriage crying beside Javier as they made their way toward their destination. Javier rubbed his head and told him to stop crying, adding that he looked even uglier when he did. Lloyd told him he couldn't help it. His dream had been so close. A man sat across from them, the leader of the delegation, Count Ventura. He asked Lloyd why he was so upset, saying that receiving a mission from Her Majesty was a great honour. Still bawling, Lloyd told him that he was deeply honoured, and that was exactly why he couldn't stop crying. Count Ventura looked at Lloyd, thoroughly unimpressed by the display. Earlier, the Queen had explained why Lloyd had been chosen, after the Count asked why he had been selected in the first place. He asked whether Lloyd was a good diplomat. The Queen answered no. Surprised, the Count asked why Lloyd had been chosen for such a sensitive task. Alicia told him that she could already predict what would happen the moment they arrived to collect him. Lloyd would cry and throw a tantrum, because all he wanted to do was live a cushy, lazy life. She then explained that the news surrounding the recent incident with the Hell Knight was false. The reports claiming that the Namaran soldiers had defeated it were lies. In truth, it had been Lloyd and his knight who defeated the Hell Knight, and they had requested that their involvement be removed from the records. She told the Count that Lloyd might be greedy and unscrupulous, a materialistic man through and through, but whenever he set his mind on a task, he always saw it through to the end. The Count narrowed his eyes, unsure whether she was praising Lloyd or insulting him. Alicia then told him to simply ignore Lloyd when he was sulking. Sooner or later, Lloyd would find something to gain from the situation. And once he did, he would find a way to get things done. Watching Lloyd now, the Count wondered whether this man truly could be useful. They arrived at Namaran, and the Sultan was informed of their arrival. After hearing the news, the Sultan gave a simple order, telling the man to ensure they were given a fitting reception. Then he grinned. The delegation was led to their accommodations, but Count Ventura was furious the moment he saw their quarters. He declared that assigning them such a place was a clear sign of disrespect from the Sultan. The Sultan's aide calmly replied that this was all they had to offer. Ventura demanded to speak with the Sultan, only for the aide to inform him that the Sultan was busy at the moment. Ventura asked how long they would have to wait. The aide answered that it could take months. Ventura shouted that this was absurd. The aide then offered Ventura a padishah, explaining that he could use it to secure better accommodations. The Sultan, he said, would gladly pay for anything the delegation required during their stay. Ventura bristled, asking why a delegation sent by Queen Magentano was being treated like beggars on the street. The aide dropped the padishah at Ventura's feet and told him he was mistaken. They should be honoured that the Sultan had offered his padishah to make their stay as comfortable as possible. With that, the aide turned and walked away. Ventura slammed his fist onto the desk, cursing the Sultan for the blatant disrespect. Seething, he remarked that they must be itching for war if this was how they chose to treat them. The royal messenger asked what they should do next. Ventura ordered him to send a message back to the Queen, requesting that a large delegation be dispatched to apply pressure to the Sultan. Then the messenger hesitated and asked where Lloyd had gone. He had disappeared some time earlier. Ventura scoffed and told him to ignore that man. The messenger cut him off, saying that the padishah was missing as well. Elsewhere in the city, a young girl stood beneath the glow of the moon, trying to sell torches. She was having little luck. People shoved past her, calling her a street rat as they went on their way. Eventually, she retreated into a dark alley and broke down crying. She had not sold a single torch and began to wonder where she would sleep that night. Then a voice spoke up behind her, asking if she needed somewhere to stay. She turned and saw Lloyd. He told her he would help and gestured for her to follow him. Lloyd led her through the streets to an expensive-looking inn and told her that this was where she would be staying. Startled, she stuttered that she could never stay in a place like this. It was far too expensive. Lloyd told her not to worry. He explained that he was the owner and that he had just bought the inn recently. He placed a document in her hands, the deed, and asked her to sign it, telling her that once she did, it would all be hers. Her eyes widened in shock. She asked who he was. A wide grin spread across Lloyd's face as he answered that he was someone basking in the almighty Samarkand, holding the padishah loosely between his fingers. Lloyd went around the city lavishly spending the padishah, spending freely without restraint. He ate at expensive restaurants, paying for everyone's meals and drinks. He bought up the finest silks in the city and even purchased ships to transport them to Cremo. Word spread quickly, and people from all over rushed to him, eager to sell their goods, as Lloyd bought everything he possibly could. Then the guards charged in. They seized Lloyd and dragged him away, bringing him before the Sultan. The Sultan looked down at Lloyd from his throne, Lloyd forced to his knees with a sword held at his neck. He asked if Lloyd was the man who had spent an entire year's worth of the palace budget in a single day. Lloyd introduced himself as Lloyd Frontera, son of Arcos Frontera, greeting the Sultan with a grin. Realization struck the Sultan. This was the man who had thwarted the monster domino effect. So this had been his plan. Lloyd had done all of this to draw his attention and force a meeting. The Sultan's eye twitched at Lloyd's insolence. Lloyd quietly thought that he had to do whatever he could to prevent war from breaking out. If it did, the Frontera estate would be the first battlefield sitting close to the border. The Sultan was thinking something similar. If war broke out, he would be forced to fight this man's estate, and after hearing the tales surrounding their land, he wondered if they could even defeat them. For a moment, he considered killing Lloyd where he knelt. Then his gaze shifted to Javier, and he paused. This man was a living weapon. Even if they won, the city itself could be destroyed in the process. Think carefully about your next move, Samarkand, Lloyd thought. If they could talk, maybe there was something for both of them to gain. The Sultan fell silent, then sighed and ordered his guards to release Lloyd and Javier. Lloyd grinned. They had made it over the first hurdle. The Sultan asked Lloyd if he had enjoyed spending all his money. Lloyd asked what he meant. The Sultan clarified, asking if he had enjoyed using the padishah. Lloyd raised his arms, then bowed before the throne, praising the great Sultan and admitting that he had enjoyed himself immensely. The Sultan was left stunned. He had not expected such an honest answer. But Lloyd was telling the truth. He had enjoyed the day. It was like being handed a limitless credit card and being told to enjoy himself. And Lloyd loved money. People said money could not buy happiness. But Lloyd believed that if that were true, then they simply did not have enough money. The Sultan asked whether Lloyd feared what the Queen might do if she learned that he was bowing his head before him. Lloyd answered that he did not. The Sultan flinched. How could this man be so openly insolent? He had not even hesitated. Still bowing, Lloyd explained. The Queen had given him some money, but it was only a little more than what the Sultan himself had gifted him. The Sultan's eyes narrowed. He asked if Lloyd was asking for more money, and if he was willing to betray the Queen for it. Lloyd said that he was. The Sultan's eyes widened. Had this man lost his mind? But Lloyd continued, saying that if he truly gave in to the temptation of money so easily, then the Sultan would have no reason to trust him. The Sultan stared at him in silence. Then after a pause, he burst out laughing. This insolent man was trying to smooth-talk him. The Sultan smiled and told Lloyd that he wanted to hear what he had to say. After all, Lloyd had spent an enormous sum just to secure this meeting. This man had guts, and the Sultan decided that he wanted Lloyd to work for him. Now that he had the Sultan's interest, Lloyd made his next move. He asked whether the Sultan truly wished for war. The Sultan gave a vague reply, saying that if war was required, then war there would be. Lloyd pressed further, asking whether the rebellion caused by the drought was the real reason, whether the Sultan intended to turn attention away from it and toward a foreign enemy. The Sultan said nothing. Lloyd then told him that he would end the drought, and when he did, he humbly asked that the Sultan meet with the Magentano delegation. The Sultan's eyes narrowed, intrigued by Lloyd's words, and he asked what plan Lloyd had in mind. Later, Lloyd returned to his room with Javier, laughing as he held a freshly signed contract. He asked Javier if he had seen the look on the Sultan's face when he signed it. He had been sweating bullets. Javier replied that the price Lloyd had demanded was enormous, adding that he was probably the first man in history to ever swindle the Sultan. Lloyd shook the contract at him, scowling, and told Javier that he was not swindling anyone. The amount he had asked for was far cheaper than a war. Lloyd knew from the novel that all of the provinces would eventually unite and rebel against the Sultan, but the order of events had already changed. He could not risk a war breaking out now. Later that night, the Sultan stood alone in his palace, gazing out through a window into the darkness beyond. His daughter approached him. It was Scheherazade. The Sultan turned and told her that he had a mission for her. He explained that the next day Lloyd Frontera would depart for the village of Kandahar. He ordered her to accompany him as his bodyguard. Then he gave his final instruction. She was to make Lloyd hers, by any means necessary. Scheherazade bowed her head. As you wish. The next day, Scheherazade met Lloyd and Javier just as they were preparing to depart. She informed Lloyd that she had been assigned as his bodyguard for the journey. Lloyd nodded to Javier, then looked back at her, and said that he already had a bodyguard. Ignoring him, she told him that she looked forward to serving him. What a stubborn woman, Lloyd thought. He wondered if the Sultan had sent her as a spy. Then he paused. He remembered her name. Was she not the Princess of Asfahan? Why would the Sultan send his own daughter as a bodyguard? Suddenly, Scheherazade struck a strange pose, her movements stiff and deliberate, before shifting into something far more alluring. Once again, she said that she looked forward to working with him. Lloyd was shaken. What kind of pose was that? Her eyes were sending an entirely different message, one that felt sharp and dangerous, like she wanted to tear him apart. Lloyd felt a wave of confusion at the mixed signals. Then it hit him. Her father had sent her to woo him. A cold shiver ran down Lloyd's spine. What was it with these creepy proposals from old men?